You've probably wondered how applications get up-to-date information in constantly changing environments. For example, applications that deal with sports scores.
This video is brought to you by OppiePie's Academy.
Or transportation, or anything that changes frequently, like the stock market, for example. Well, usually the way it's done is with something called a web service. And I've actually got one of these web services pulled up here. This is the Irish Rail web service, which gives us information about what's going on in Irish Rail. There's actually several functions available within this service. The first function right here is the Get All Stations function. This will give us information about all of the stations within the Irish Rail system. So you see here we have in the language XML information about a number of different stations. For example, Belfast Central is the name of this station. We have its latitude and longitude, a station code, and a station ID. Now, frankly, information about the individual stations is pretty static. It probably doesn't change all that often. But we also have information like get current trains. Now, this is going to be a lot more dynamic because it gives you the exact position of the train at any given time. And as you know, these trains are likely to be moving. So this is the recording date here. And there's a message about the train. It's supposed to depart at 12:30. It gives you the latitude and longitude. The train status N means the train is not yet running. But if we scroll down, we'll start to see trains that are running, like this train, which is positioned at this latitude and longitude. And we get the train code and the train's public message. So this XML gives us information about every train that's actually running within the Irish Rail system. Now, we need to get this information into our application in order for it to be useful. So let's go back. Let's actually go ahead and get the Get All Stations link. So I'm going to copy the link address. And just for right now, I'm going to put it here in this document. So what I'd like to do is through JavaScript, go ahead and create an app that will get the information you saw in the Get All Stations function of the API. So as I create my basic document structure here, what's going to happen is our program itself is going to reach out to the URL that I've put on top in comments. Once it reaches out, it's going to wait for a response because we don't know how long that response is going to take. When we get the response, we're going to take that information in XML and we're going to parse it in a way that the user can understand it. Because obviously we don't want to show all of those tags that we saw in the XML that was returned. I'm going to store this on my desktop right now for convenience as irish.html. And let's go ahead and for right now in our body, let's just go ahead and put a single div for the result. Now, of course, we're going to need to do this using JavaScript. So I'm going to put in some script tags. And we're going to start with simply making contact with the actual API and getting a response. So we're going to make our API connection. We're going to do this when the program loads. So I'm going to create a function that runs when the page is loaded and everything is rendered. So this function, which is an anonymous function because it has no name, will run when the window onload event occurs. So as soon as the screen is drawn. And what we want to do is we want to make our connection with the Irish Rail API. So I'm creating a global variable called XML HTTP. That variable will actually be the object that communicates with our server, or the Irish Rail server. And first thing we're going to need to do is instantiate that. So the way that works is like this. XML HTTP equals new XML HTTP request. And that means XML HTTP, this object or variable here right now, has certain powers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use it to set up our connection. And by the way, you can see here that we're getting from our environment here a number of properties and methods that are relevant to the XML HTTP object. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to use open to open the connection, and that gets 3 arguments. The first argument is the method. We're going to be using get. That's going to be get or post, which you probably remember from earlier in the course. We're going to use get in this case. And then we have the URL, which is up here. So I think what I'm going to do is take this out of the comments and just declare a variable here to hold the URL. And then that becomes part of the open statement. The last argument here is going to be true. We're going to want to do this asynchronously, meaning the user is free to do other things on the page while this communication is happening. Now that won't have an effect this time because really there's nothing else for the user to do. If we put false, this would be a synchronous process and the user would have to wait for the information to come back before they could interact with other parts of the web page. All right, now the other thing we need to do is we need to set an onReadyState change callback. And I'm going to call it process train info. That's going to be the name of a function that's called when the ready state changes in the XML HTTP object. That ready state is going to change a few times during the communication with the server. All right, so now let's go ahead and initialize the communication with send. So like I said, the process train info function is what's going to be called by the onReadyState change event. Now, we can simply take a look at here just for fun, the ready state. So that's going to be XML HTTP.readyState. Now there's 5 radio states, 0 to 5. And as we communicate with the server, it's going to give us some of those ready states. So there's 2, 3, 4. And 4 is the ready state we're looking for, meaning communication is done. So we know we're communicating with the server, which is good. So now what we're going to do is we only want to process the data when that ready state is 4. The other thing we want to check for is to make sure we got an HTTP status of 200, meaning OK. That's versus like a 404, which generally means that the page wasn't found. So hopefully we'll get both of those. And when we do, we're ready to process the data. Now the data that comes back is actually in this case, the response XML. Now, if we look at the response XML like this, we get this object XML document. So it comes back as an object because that XML is treated as an object. So let's do this. Instead of alerting it out, let's use the console and we'll take a look at what comes back. So here's our developer tools. And there's our object right there in the console. See if I can make that a little bigger. So the communication takes place. That's what comes back. Now this is the actual parsed XML you were looking at before. So there's the information about Dundalk Station, the latitude and longitude, the station code, and the station ID. So we've been able to make an API connection here with the Irish Trains API. We've made a request and we got our response. So we looked at here how we make that connection with the XML HTTP request object, the open method to open the connection, the onReadyState change callback function, and then send to initialize the communication. We looked at the ready states and the status to make sure we have a ready state of 4 and a status of 200, and then we have our response in the XML http.response.xml property. We'll look at parsing that response in a little bit.